שמש דקה ומוות בכנפיה.
I emphasized last time, at the conclusion of the last video, that the rabbinic interpretation of Scripture understands the book of Ruth as a prophecy. And we have now Ruth chapter 2 verse 14 before us, where it is written, Boaz said to her, to Ruth at mealtime, "Come here, eat of the bread, dip your bite into the fermented," I translated, "dip your pitta into the hummus." And she said at the side of the reapers, he reached her roasted kernels, she ate, was full, and even left over. We have seen Ruth thanking Boaz for his attention, grace, and generosity, and how he then invites her to dinner. And then he says to her, "Eat of the bread." And the Midrash Yalkut Shimoni, it's a medieval Midrash, notes here very short and says, it is from the bread of the kingdom. And then the text, the biblical text continues, dip your pitta into the hummus, and it's good to see here the image of dipping a piece of bread, oriental bread, into this soup, whatever it is. And the Yalkut Shimoni, the medieval Jewish commentary, explains that his kingdom, I quote here, his kingdom was torn back and forth for an hour. As the first Redeemer, so the other, the later, the last Redeemer, he was covered and returned and was revealed. Actually, if I listen to these Orthodox medieval rabbis, it sounds that somehow, in a hidden way, they point at what happened to Yeshua, to Jesus. He came, and then he was covered. So, as the Apostle John reports, they were not able to see him, even if they would have wanted. And we believe that he will come again, he will return, and will be revealed. How did Jewish tradition come to think that this had a messianic dimension when Ruth dips her piece of bread into the wine vinegar at the invitation of Boaz? Is there a connection with what the New Testament tells us, how Jesus during the Last Supper hands bread to his disciples in order to then dip his morsel, his piece of bread, into the bowl with the one who betrayed him? Or is there a connection when the dying Yeshua, the dying Jesus on the cross, cries out and they quench his thirst with vinegar? One Messianic Jewish commentator says at the book of Ruth that this was exactly the drink that was offered to Messiah. And he quotes Psalm 69 where it says, "They gave me poison for food, and for my thirst they gave me sour wine to drink." Or there's this other image of Yeshua after the resurrection, met these disciples of Emmaus, and then it says he took bread, gave thanks, broke it and gave it to them, and then their eyes were opened and they recognized him. Or when other disciples had problems to believe that he had risen and thought he was a ghost, it says, "Do you have anything to eat here?" He wanted to prove by eating with them that he indeed was risen. And the same thing again happened at the Sea of Galilee just before his ascension, that he invited them for a meal. Now, these medieval Yalkut Shimoni, or perhaps older Jewish interpreters of Scripture, they connect the statement in Ruth 2:14 when it says that Boaz gave to Ruth these roasted kernels. They connect it with an account of the Judean king Manasseh. And it says there in Scripture that he, the Lord, heard his supplication and established him in Jerusalem into his kingship. And then Yalkut Shimoni says, here we talk about King Messiah. Now we have to know that this Manasseh, he was the son of King Hezekiah. He was a descendant of Ruth and of the anointed successor, David. He had become completely pagan, Gentile. And then he had disappeared in the Assyrian captivity. Later on, his successors did exactly what, from a Jewish point of view, the vast majority of Christianity does. They worship the God of Israel, but in detouring through their pagan customs. Now, Manasseh was reinstated to his kingdom, centered in Jerusalem. How come Messianic, Orthodox, rabbinical commentators connect this with the Messiah? I do not know. I can only guess. But I observe these indications and these hints and how they correspond with what the New Testament tells us. And I hear that rabbinic commentators read the book of Ruth as messianic prophecy. In closing, I would like to point you to one interesting observation, and that is, again, not my observation, it is the observation of modern Orthodox commentators. They say that there is the relationship between Ruth and Naomi that is very decisive on one hand, and the relationship between Ruth and Boaz on the other. But Naomi and Boaz never ever meet throughout the whole scroll of Ruth. But Ruth's relationship with Boaz is decisive for Naomi. And she works as an intermediary between Boaz and Naomi. And then Boaz provides for Ruth, and Ruth has to provide for Naomi as an intermediary. And it is interesting that one lady, she's an Orthodox theologian, commentator, she wrote a book on the book scroll of Ruth, and she says that Boaz and Naomi seem to be incapable of direct communication.